Whew. Good evening, everyone. It's actually Saturday. It's Saturday. I know it's a Friday, like it's on Fridays when I usually shoot these, but it's actually Saturday night. It's time for a shop update. Now, I'm not moving the scheduled program of doing shop updates. I'm not trying to move it to weekends, okay? I'm trying to get them out on Fridays. I've just been super busy. I missed last week's due to some family things I'd rather have done instead of doing these videos. And I also didn't shoot this past Friday because, again, family comes before business or videos, YouTube videos. So it just does. That's a rule of thumb here. Like, these videos will get pushed aside for two things. Family is number one. Number two is if these videos get in the way of doing business, I don't do it. I just won't do it. So, that being said, let's return to our regularly scheduled program. Sit back, relax, get yourself a nice cool beverage or warm beverage if you wish. A nice snack, get cuddled up and cozy in a good seating position. And let's start talking about some cars. As I said, I missed a video last Friday. I didn't get a chance to do it. Had some family stuff. My son's off for summer vacation, and I just wanted to spend some time with my boy. So I've been doing that a little bit more. Coming in earlier, leaving early, kind of puts a little kibosh on the schedule of me shooting these videos sometimes. But we'll be back to doing it on the regular here. So in 2 weeks' time, you're expecting this is going to be a long one, right? And you're probably looking down at the time thing, and you're like, well, it's not much different than the other ones. It's because I'm gonna blast through it for you. I'm just gonna run through this quick and dirty. All right, as it always is. It's all quick and dirty. I don't edit these things. This is all off the cuff. There's no teleprompter or script. Just coming right out of the old noggin here. Now, let's get to these cars, shall we? We've got two of them to talk about. For 2 weeks, there's been progress made on a Defender 90 project and a Lagonda LG6 project. Both, as you know, if you go back and watch previous videos, you know that the LG6 is on a time crunch. She's got a big event that she needs to make her way to. We'll talk about that and her in a second. And this is kind of the closest one to leaving project, and that's why it's being worked on. It's nearest to getting finished up and going, which frees up some space, some time to work on some other stuff that's kind of sitting underneath covers here. So, what, in 2 weeks' time, what did we do here at Brooklyn's on these fine automobiles? Well, let's talk about this Defender first. Now, Christian has been point man on this project. I have not really done anything with it. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of what he's done. What he's told me he's done, because I'm not watching him. I'm not hovering over him. He does what he needs to do. He's been doing headliner stuff still. Now, you probably heard that in the last video. He's been doing headliner stuff. And he's still doing headliner stuff. He's also being called away quite often for other things. I asked him about this. Hey, what do you want me to say in the update? He said, well, I've been just busy other stuff. I've been called away. I had to call this person and talk to this person and send this email. And that does come up quite often. And that sucks for sure. But he got some stuff done. Not as much as he wanted to, but he got some stuff done. We've got a back panel here. This actually goes over the rear door in the back of the car. There's a door on the very, very back. And it's actually a piece that goes across the back here over the top, in the back of the car. I can't stress enough, it goes in the back of the car, okay? In the back, over the door, in the back. It's covered now. Looking all right. There's some stuff he needs to tidy up. Probably looks better on camera than it does in person. We are sticklers for how headliners look, and we have never been like ecstatic about a headliner. Like, it's never been like, oh my God, we nailed it. We knocked it so hard out of the park. We're just gonna quit. We're just gonna call it a day. We always are like, I could have done that just a little bit better there, or maybe I could have worked that corner just a little harder. And in all honesty, when you see it, if you actually stand back and aren't so critical of yourself, you're like, actually, that looks way better than anybody else does these. Like 1,000 times better than all the other shops that do this shit. Looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with his progress so far. It's looking pretty tidy. He's got 2 big panels to do, so hopefully next week he's going to be knocking these suckers way the hell out. He's found a glue that he likes. He's found a process that he's enjoying. Hopefully he can knock out these 2 other panels and we can have the headliner panels complete. When the headliner panels are done, we can start getting windows and headliner in together. They kind of correspond with each other. They're kind of like meshing of gears. They kind of have to go in almost at the same time, but kind of in symphony with each other. So hopefully we'll be on that, and he will get that squared away soon after the headliners are done. Now, he also did a little bit of work with me on the Lagonda project. So let's tackle that stuff that he did with me on the Lagonda project. I have pulled him away as well. So he helped me out with doing some finish work on these firewall trim pieces. You can see these copper pieces here that I made up. I had him do the finishing work, which is the sanding, the kind of smoothing out of edges, the hammering out of dimples and dents and wrinkles and stuff like that. And he did a phenomenal job of it. These actually look really, really good. Let's see if we can get in tight on them and see them a little bit better. You can see that like joint pieces, you can't even tell that there's actually a joint there. You can almost not tell that there's a joint there. Phenomenal. They're finished, I think, to like 200 grit paper or something like that. These are actually going to be finished to a polish. Now, for those of you out there that know your metallurgy, you probably are thinking to yourself, you're putting copper, bare copper, over bare aluminum. Give it a few months, and that's going to look terrible, right? Electrolysis is going to set in, and you're going to have a reaction between the 2 metals, and you're going to have the aluminum turn into a nice white powder, and the copper is going to go green on you. And you're absolutely right, because that's how science works. That's how the chemical reactions between those 2 metals tend to function. And that certainly would suck after putting all this hard work into this firewall. What are we going to do? So for the time being, what we're going to do is we're going to polish up the copper pieces. We're going to make them look nice. But on the back sides, we're going to apply some kind of seal coating onto the back side of them. Something nice, something that isn't going to get, it gets hot. It's not going to run out and show up on the firewall or anything like that. Probably a paint. Now, when the car gets back from doing the Colorado Grand, and it's had its moment in the sun out there in the Rockies with all the very beautiful cars that it gets to hang out with in September, we'll be able to pull these pieces back off. They're very much removable. We can take them right back off the car with relative ease. And they're designed to do that. So we can actually send these copper pieces out and have them chrome plated, which I think will be a little bit more fitting than copper on the firewall. I like this look. It's nice, but it's not really what Lagonda would have done. So we're going to have these chrome plated, which I think fits the car a lot better. I think that actually will look a lot better in chrome. Now, it'll be up to the owner, but we want to make sure that until that time comes, that the undersides of these, where they're touching the aluminum, there's some kind of a sealant that keeps the 2 metals from actually coming in contact with each other and causing that dreaded electrolysis, villainous, vile thing. For those of you who don't know what happened, basically the aluminum rusts. I know you've heard in science class aluminum doesn't rust. It's malarkey. It oxidizes just like, well, not just like steel, but it oxidizes like steel oxidizes, and it turns into a white powder over time, okay? And that's what it does. You can get holes in aluminum cars, though not as common and not as easy. It does happen. You can get rust in aluminum, okay? It does happen. It does. Just bear with me. One day, I'll give you a nice thorough view of not only a Land Rover, because I'm sure there's a Land Rover. You can go back and watch the video on this thing when we were doing the tailgate. I showed you there's all kinds of rust in the aluminum. And we'll go over into the paint booth over there, and I'll show you the Maserati 3500 GT, and you can see the rust that aluminum gets, okay? It happens. The electrolysis process, it eats away of the aluminum. It's basically a reaction, the aluminum and something else, and it eats it away, and it's bad juju, and it'll really, really happen with the copper and aluminum stuff here. So we got to make sure we nip it in the bud before it happens bad. Now, on to what I did on said Lagonda. Now, the Lagonda is going to, as I said before, the Colorado Grand, which is kind of like Amelia Island, but moving. It's kind of like, I wouldn't say Pebble Beach because I don't think it's that level, but it's up there. It's like a really high-end car show that's always driving around, okay? It's always on the move. Now, it's great. I think it's based out of Napa. No, that's not right. It's based out of Vail. That's the one I was thinking of. Napa is in California. Vail is in Colorado. I'm getting my geographies right now. Okay, you can tell I don't edit, right? So, this car is going to a very prestigious event with very prestigious cars from all walks of life, from all measures of years, makes, and models. But almost all of them have a really good history and are very prominent and important automobiles. This one, not to be excluded from that list, very important and prominent automobile. Okay? Very cool. Not just a run-of-the-mill LG6. Now, chassis E3007 here was formerly owned by Mr. W.O. Bentley himself. It was his car. Okay? One of his cars, it's kind of like, yeah, his ass sat in that seat. Wow, why is that important? Well, he's kind of an important guy in the car world, isn't he? His name is Bentley. It isn't a Bentley, but his name is Bentley and he owned this car. So, neat. Because of that, we're kind of stepping things up a little bit when we're doing this car this time around. We were building this car to be super dependable for the great race events. Now, we wanted it to look nice, but its dependability is what came first. Now, we have to keep that dependability factor that we're trying to go after, and we've got to bump up how it looks. It's got to look a lot better than what we were going for before, because it's, like I said, it's like the Amelia Island of driving events. It's a big event where we're driving around a lot, but it's really high-end, expensive cars and really beautiful automobiles that are doing the event. So it needs to it's gotta hang with that kind of level, that kind of caliber, and we're gonna get it there. But there's some stuff we're doing to it that we wouldn't have normally done. Number one, the generator on the car was working fine, but it was dirty, crusty, nasty looking. Now, I could have rattle canned it, could have done the old Facebook Marketplace rebuild on it. Could have done that. It would have been fine. It would have looked okay. Nobody would have noticed. But I would have known. So I tore it apart, cleaned it very, very thoroughly. Now, when I put it back together, you're not going to believe this. When I put it back together, the generator on this didn't work. Everything was put back together exactly the way it came apart. There was no parts that were necessarily replaced. They were just cleaned. And it didn't work. So, I've had this happen. In my early youth, I would have this happen when I was first starting out and I didn't understand how things worked. There's some tests we ran. We did a motoring test on the generator, which is basically where you take a generator and you turn it into an electric motor. It's not that hard to do. Pretty simple, and it basically shows you if all the connections inside that motor or inside that generator are working. Well, it failed the motor test. So I did the old spin it up test to see if it charges. Spun it to about 3,000 RPMs, put out 0.2 volts, and that's it. No dice. So I did the only smart thing that a person could do, and that is I went to a higher authority. I actually went to my local rebuilder, who does generators, alternators, and starters. That's what he does. I've used him for years. He just turned 85 years old. It's a dying art for sure. And I said, hey, this young buck here, I'm missing something. I need the wise old hands of my local man here. So I took the generator up to him to have him check it out. I also took the original starter, which was a Rotax starter, took the original starter up to him to have him rebuild that as well as a spare for the new starter that we already have. So we have a starter that's good. It's rebuilt. It's good to go. It works great. It's perfect. But I pulled the old starter off this car, and I'm going to have that one rebuilt as well so that we have a backup starter for this automobile. Should be great. There's nothing wrong with having backups. Now, if my guy gets back to me and he says, hey, this generator you brought me, she's toast. She needs like an armature, or she needs rewind, to be rewound, or something's bad in it. Which is a worst case scenario. He probably won't get it ready and done for me for the Colorado Grand event, which means I have to find another generator that works and is cleaned up and is good to go. Or we convert the car to an alternator setup. Now, I know that's sacrilege. it's going to look terrible. Some kind of new Nip and Denso alternator hanging off the front end. Nope. No. This will be one of those fancy Power Light or Wasp Performance style generators that are an alternator, but they look like a generator. And in fact, they even sell dummy boxes. This is a regulator assembly right here. They even sell dummy regulator boxes so that you don't have to have anything that looks out of place. It all looks like it's the way it should be. Now, the reason why I'm not jumping to the alternator immediately is because I've used these before. I've used these generator replacements, these alternator replacements for generators. I've used them already. Used them on a couple MGs already. And in fact, there's a Lagonda that sits right back there underneath the cover that also had one on it that I installed years and years ago before I blew that engine apart to get rebuilt. And they're okay. They're all right. They're a nice idea. I like the idea behind them. However, the execution, I have not actually had one that I felt really good about. Now, I haven't used the Wasp Performance ones, but I have used a couple of the Power Light ones. And I think the one for the Lagonda back there, that was a really early Power Light one. And it was kind of like everything from an alternator was just kind of hot glued inside of a case. And I didn't like that. I was really unhappy with it. And it actually failed. It actually failed, and I had to have it rebuilt. And that's when I found out all the internals inside of it were just Nip and Denso parts, and they were off-the-shelf pieces. And nothing was super custom except for the housing it was in, which was just an aluminum tube. That's all it was. It was just an aluminum tube that housed an alternator assembly. So, as I keep going rambling with this story, I'm not sold on the idea. Number one, this car is not really drawing a lot of electrical currents. The ignition system does not require the charging system to function. The ignition system is entirely on its own. It's two magnetos, which means if they're spinning, they're working. Well, as long as they work. They don't need a battery to function. They don't need 12 volts sent to the magnetos at any point in time. There's no coil systems or anything like that. The magneto generates its own spark. As it rotates, it generates its own electrical current, which generates and fills the coil with its own abilities to spark, and it makes its own spark. So it doesn't need the charging system with a magneto setup. So there's no draw from the ignition system on this car. So the only thing that's actually drawing the current is really just the lighting, the brake lights, the interior lights, the heater, blower motor, the cooling fan. It's not, in all honesty, guys, it's not a really, really heavy draw on this car. So an alternator is kind of overkill for what this car is going to do. But if it's the only option you got, if the only thing you can find is that alternator conversion, then it is. Now we're going to wait to hear back from the rebuilder before we bite the bullet in buying what is a very costly alternator. It's $2,100 US, and that's not shipped to my door. That's just the outright price. Hey, I get it. R&D on that stuff is pricey. I get it. I'm not here to say, hey, that's too crazy of a number. It's just like, yeah, yep, sure. I don't need to buy a dummy box. I can wire around it. But as far as the wiring goes, I need to know if I'm going to run a generator or if I'm going to run an alternator, because that does change how I wire this car. And that's important. Now, that's the debacle with the generator, which has happened in the last 2 weeks. Other thing that's happened is I finished up the heater assembly. She's looking right pretty right here. We did not have time to send any of the chrome out to get re-chromed, but I did polish it. It came up pretty well. She's kind of oily because I've been fingering it and touching it and playing with it. I didn't polish up the copper pieces all that much. They probably should also be chrome plated. They look nice though. It looks good. It's got a nice wrinkle finish on it. It looks great. The other thing I did was I blew the carburetors the rest of the way apart and cleaned them thoroughly. And it came up really nice. This is kind of how zinc looks after we're done cleaning it. It's got a matte finish to it, nothing too fancy. We do use a media blaster on some of the parts, but it's soft, low pressure. We're not trying to give it a rough texture. Shouldn't look like it was freshly sand cast when we're done. Should look pretty good. Now, there was a debate on this car because when I took the carburetors apart, the dash tops, the top of the carburetor, and you'll see it here in a second, I'll show it to you. The top of the carburetors were polished. Now, I'm the guy who polished the tops of those carburetors. They came in, they were bare aluminum, they looked like garbage. I polished them up, made them look nice. However, going over old photos of this car and other versions of the LG6 and other period cars, it was not an uncommon practice for SU to supply the carburetors in a blacked out enamel finish. It's really common to see it on stuff like Bentleys and Rolls Royces, but you would also see it on Lagondas. And this car was one of those cars. It had blacked out enameled carburetors. So the debate was, do we black out enamel the carburetors again, or do we just finish them to natural finish? Really common on SUs that they're just natural finish. The bodies are a zinc or an aluminum or a brass or bronze, and they're just left natural, no big deal. They look good, they look fine, they look great. However, there may be sticklers in the world who say that car should have painted ones. If that stickler is there, he's probably looking at the firewall saying, well, that's not right. And he's right. It's not right. So we debated back and forth. Of course, bounced it over to the owner, said, what do you want? Do you want these to have natural finish, or do you want them to be black? And the owner said, make them black. Make them black. So I went through the process of cleaning up all the carburetors, only to cover them with paint. In this case, it's a nice epoxy paint, and they come up looking kind of like this. Now you'll see that surfaces, these are a bronze casting carburetor, so you'll see that certain surfaces are left unpainted to keep them from, to keep them from having paint on them. Even the dash tops, this is one of the dash tops, it gets a nice epoxy paint. Now, originally, some people will say that these should be enameled, and I do believe they were originally enameled. However, enameling is kind of a lost art in terms of the automotive world for a lot of things. We can have them enameled. There are companies that will enamel these. We could also have them powder coated. We could have had them porcelain coated, which to me is pretty similar to enamel painting. However, here's the thing about all those coatings. I got to send this off to have somebody do that coating. And if they get, I don't know, some of that powder coating or enamel or porcelain inside here, well, it could cause me some problems. I could have a carburetor that doesn't work very well, right? Or maybe if they get it inside there, that wouldn't be good, right? I don't want that. Paint, we make paints that work with fuels nowadays. Reason why they would have been enamel coating is for heat resistance and fuel resistance. So we make paints that do that already. And if this set of carburetors decides to get above 500 degrees in temperature, or decides to entirely submerge itself in some caustic chemical, well, we got a different story here. Maybe enamel coating should have been the route we take. But I don't think that's going to happen. So we use a pretty well-known epoxy. I'm not here to endorse brands or anything like that, but we use a pretty well-known epoxy, and it works really well, and it shines up as well as it should. And the carburetors look, well, they look like they should. There's no disagreement there. They look good. I like it. It's a good look for those carburetors. I like it. I think the owner's going to like it a lot. It's correct for the car. And the best thing about painting them is that if at any point in time, if I chip one of those dash pots, I can media blast it really quick and just repaint it. I don't have to ship it to some dying art person. I can just paint it. Not to say those dying art people don't deserve your business. I'm just saying that, this is so much easier. It works. Just do it. It works. Do it. We also got together our list of parts that we need for these carburetors to finish them up. And one of those parts was all of the parts. These are HV5 carburetors is what they're referred to, SU HV5. For those of you in the British car world, you probably know what an HS2 or HS4 or an HIF or an H series carburetor. These are HV5 carburetors. These are a pre-war style carburetor. They're used on supercharged MGs from the pre-war. They're used on Lagondas, Invictas, Aston Martins, so on and so forth. Pretty obscure carburetor to say the least. You can buy brand new ones from Berlin Fuel. They are pricey though. They are pricey. Over $1,000 for one, or over £1,000 for one of these things. One of the pieces that we needed was a fuel top. Now these are a different size than most of the H series carburetors that we work on, like for MGAs, TR3s, T series, and stuff like that. These are bigger in size. flow more fuel, I guess. I don't know. Hold more fuel, at least. They're also made of zinc. And that's not uncommon to have zinc parts in SU carburetors in this period of time. I think zinc parts for SU carburetors lasted until maybe the mid to late 40s. It was common to see zinc. I think TCs were one of the last MGs to have zinc carburetors. Zinc is not a very good wearing part. It also doesn't take a torque very well. It's a very cheap metal. And in this instance, these parts right here, in this hole right here is threaded. And I can't really get it in there, but maybe you can see, maybe it'll focus in on it. Those threads they're toast. They're gone. They're stripped. Not an uncommon thing. In fact, when I talked to Joe Cardro about doing these carburetors, and the reason why there was such a timeline issue was because the owner wants these to be black, and Joe doesn't actually do blackout carburetors anymore. He used to, but now he has to find somebody to do them, and it's shipping carburetors around the world to get black paint put on them. So we thought we can do that in-house. It's fine. So, but one of the things that Joe does is he actually machines these. He'll actually tap the threads further down the hole here. And he actually makes a longer banjo bolt to go in this to grab onto those new threads. However, he may be a little bit cheaper to do that, but you can buy these brand spanking new in zinc with the proper markings on them from Berlin Fuel over in the UK. Weigh your options for sure if you have one of these. Joe may be cheaper. I didn't actually check with him, but one of the other problems is that this one actually says Carburetor Company Limited on the top of it, if you can see that there, in Birmingham, SU. This would be a later top. Wouldn't be correct for this car. So it's been replaced. This is the correct top for the car. It says Adderley Park, Birmingham, SU. This is a correct original one. SU Berlin Fuels over in the UK actually makes this part with the Adderley Park markings. Brand new. It's 120 pounds. It's a little, maybe $200 somewhere in there, a little over that. And since we're ordering a bunch of parts for these carburetors already coming from Berlin Fuels and from Joe Curto as well, we decided to just get a new one. Just get a new one. So I'm waiting to paint up the flow tops, the good one, waiting to paint this until the new one comes in. That way we can match the finishes between the two, and they look phenomenal. The other thing that's going to happen to these carburetors is, and I know I'm rambling, I'm running long on the video, I can tell. You're all kind of losing it here. Here's the float. These things are ginormous on these HV5 carburetors. They're huge floats. They are brass floats. They are tinned together or soldered together. They work very, very well. The biggest problem is they're hollow. Now, there's been debate about whether or not ethanol fuels will react to the solder on these floats and, of course, find a hole or make a hole with a little bit of time and sink this float. Now, she's kind of got a little jingle belly going on there, which means there's something inside there, but we can't tell what it is. They do float wonderfully. They're not problematic. They cleaned up nicely. However, they make a new float with a new material. Now, this car is going to be doing some endurance running. It's going to be doing the Great Race. It's going to be doing the Colorado Grand. The owner wants to drive it. These things become a liability in the carburetor system. Is it a big liability? Is there a high percentage that this is going to fail? No, not really. We've been dealing with ethanol fuels here in Missouri since I can remember. So you're talking at least the 90s, since I was paying attention to gas pumps. We've had 10% or at least 10% ethanol in fuels here in the state of Missouri. So we've been dealing with this ethanol stuff for, I guess, longer than the rest of the world has. And these don't tend to sink because of ethanol. They tend to sink because they just have a hole in them and they sink. That's why they sink. But they make a new float that is made out of a closed cell foam plastic, which is impervious to the modern ethanol fuels, which is key. That's crucial. It's plastic. I want to make sure that it doesn't get attacked by these fuels. And it replaces these. And because it's a closed cell plastic foam, it can technically never sink. All right? So it's not a hollow float. It's just a bunch of little hollow balls, cells, that allow it to keep buoyancy. That's something I'm willing to, let's buck up. Let's buy the new technology in this case. These work great. I'm going to throw them in his toolkit for spares and backups, just in case, as I do with most things. When I upgrade to modern technology, I always tell the owner and teach the owner, hey, here's how you change it back to the old stuff if the new stuff decides to fail. And here, I put everything in a Ziploc bag marked for you. Goes in your glove box, goes in your trunk. Just keep it with the car. It's fine. I do this a lot with Pertronics setups. Okay, so when I put Pertronics on these older British sports cars, I always tell the owner of the car, you got a full tune-up kit, points plate, ready to go. All the points are there, the condenser's there, all your wire is there. It's all ready to go. If this Pertronics fails, it's not really fixable on the side of the road. Here's a points plate. Keep it in your glove box. Keep a screwdriver handy. Here's how you set your points. Here's how you put it in. Here's how you do this job. And you'll be on the road and you'll be running. You'll get yourself home. And then you can order your new Pertronics if you want. Whatever. And I even talked to the former head of Mini Mania. One of the things he said, what do you do for endurance racing? Because he hadn't done endurance racing. He asked me. So I'd done a lot of endurance racing with a Mini. And he said, what spares do you carry along? And I said, I carry backup points. He said, what about Pertronics? And I said, well, I don't like Pertronics because they can fail on the side of the road and you're dead. And he said, so what do you. I said, so I carry points and I carry backup points. He said, so just carry a backup Pertronics set. I said, well, if you got the bankroll for another Pertronics set, you go right ahead and do it. I was on a budget. I carried points. So, key tip there, if you're putting in modern stuff, if you can carry the old original part and the old original part is still good, just carry it along with you. It's not going to hurt anything. Just throw it in the glove box, throw it in the trunk. Worst case scenario, it gets in the way of putting your luggage in your trunk or something. Like, who cares? It'll get you, it'll save you and get you back home. That's important. Or at least get you off the road to a safe spot. That's another thing. Anyway, one last thing on the Lagonda. We talked to the machine shop this week. We are being jerks to the machine shop to get them to kind of push along. That is something I don't like doing. I really hate doing it. I don't want customers to do it to us, and I certainly don't want to be the customer that does it to somebody else. However, we're in a time crunch with this old girl, so we got to be that kind of jerk. Now, last time we talked to them about this car and pushing to get the engine done, their holdup was, and this is them telling us, their holdup was everything was good to go except they needed to get the Babbitt's poured for the bearings. Now, a Babbitt bearing, you can look this up. There's a good Haggerty video on Babbitt bearings. I believe in either a Model A Ford or a Ford Flathead V8. So a Model B32 V8 Ford, one of those. Those came with Babbitt bearings. Now, I don't have a Babbitt bearing connecting rod here to show you what a Babbitt bearing is, but I do have a standard, more modern style, and I'm going to modern style connecting rod to show you and kind of give you an idea. Real quick here. This is a connecting rod for an MGT series car. I believe it's for a TD. I didn't measure out the length. I didn't check the part numbers. I don't know off the top of my head. It looks TD to me. I've worked a lot with TD engines, and that looks like a TD part to me. So, this old girl is not a Babbitt bearing rod, but what a Babbitt bearing is right here on the big end of the connecting rod, and this also works for the main bearing areas on the engine. They would actually pour liquid hot metal into here and cast your white metal tin bearings into the connecting rod itself. As opposed to how this connecting rod actually works, which it uses what's called a shell type bearing, which has the Babbitt material or the bearing material is physically cast onto a shell, usually made of steel, and then that entire assembly is just kind of fitted inside this connecting rod. Now, we got away from Babbitt bearings because it's a labor-intensive process. It is not quick in serviceability. You can drop that cap off that rod in the car and replace the rod bearings in the car as long as there's no damage to the rest of the parts. You can change these bearings, and you don't have to have any special tools or equipment. You just need to have a wrench to take the nuts off and to be able to put the bearings in. So serviceability was one of the big reasons why we changed from Babbitt bearings to these bearings. And the other one was a kind of a belief that Babbitt bearings weren't as strong or as good as a shell-type bearing. I think that's, to me, that's on the fence when it comes to these older cars. I don't believe that it's better or worse. I think it's kind of one half dozen of the other. Like, it's kind of the same. And I believe even today, I think there's some manufacturers that have actually gone back to doing, I believe, a babbitt bearing setup. I want to say, I know that, and I have to look this up, so, I could be dead wrong on this, but I want to say that modern Cummins diesel engines actually have a split cap rod where they physically cast the rod in a circle with the big part here, and then they physically force this cap off and split it. And the parting ways are like craggly surface parts. They're not machined flush and smooth. I'll try to show you. And because of that, the cap fits better. And I think, but I don't know this. So this area right here is kind of rough in texture on those connecting rods from Cummins. And I don't think they're machined to take a shell type bearing. I don't know that they may take a babbitt bearing on those. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me in the comments. How about that? You can just tell me I'm wrong in the comments and not even mention the Cummins engine. You can just say you're wrong. It's fine. Whatever. Anyway, that is the long and short of it. I know this was a long one. I hope all of you have a great weekend, and I hope you have a great next week. I will see you again on Friday this time, with more updates on these wonderful, wonderful automobiles. I will see you again then. Thanks for watching.